Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Luke Harrison, and this was the 6th hour searching for Alexis Johnson in the trails of Blackwood National Forest, and my legs were starting to shake from exhaustion, while something deep in these Oregon woods was watching me stumble through the underbrush like wounded prey. The radio on my belt crackled with static, my third dead battery today, and I could taste copper fear mixing with the stale energy bar I'd choked down an hour ago. Alexis Johnson, 19 years old, college sophomore from Portland, had been missing for 18 hours now after her solo hiking trip went dark somewhere along the Devil's Backbone Trail. Her mother's voice still echoed in my skull from the 3 a.m. phone call. "Please find my baby, please. She's all I have left." I transferred to Blackwood National Forest only 2 months ago from the desert parks of Nevada, and everything here felt wrong. The way the Douglas firs seemed to lean in too close, how the morning mist never fully burned off even in late September, the way local rangers would go quiet when certain trail names came up in conversation. My GPS showed coordinates 45.2847 degree on 121, 7745 degree W, putting me roughly 3 miles northeast of where Alexis's car was found in the Devil's Backbone parking area, her hiking permit still tucked under the windshield wiper like a tombstone marker. The scent hit me first, something sweet and rotten beneath the pine needles like fruit left too long in the sun, mixed with the metallic tang that made my sinuses burn. My hiking boots crunched through fallen leaves that seemed too brittle for September, and when I knelt to examine what looked like a partial footprint in the soft earth, I noticed my hands were trembling from more than just caffeine withdrawal. The print was small, maybe a size 6 women's hiking boot, but the heel struck me as wrong somehow, too deep for someone Alexis's weight, as if she'd been carrying something heavy or moving unnaturally when she passed this way. "Alexis!" I called out, my voice echoing through the canyon walls with a hollow sound that came back distorted, almost mocking. "Alexis Johnson, if you can hear me, call out." But the forest absorbed my shouts like a hungry mouth, leaving only the unnatural silence that had been following me since dawn. No bird songs, no squirrel chatter, not even the buzz of insects that should be thick in these woods. The quiet pressed against my eardrums until I could hear my own heartbeat thundering like war drums. That's when I heard the crying. Soft at first, almost lost in the whisper of wind through the canopy, but unmistakably a child's sob echoing from somewhere deeper in the woods. I froze, every instinct from my ranger training telling me to proceed with caution, but the sound tugged at something primal in my chest. The same protective response that kicked in whenever my own 7-year-old daughter Emma scraped her knee or woke from a nightmare. The sobbing came again. Definitely a little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, and my radio crackled with dead static when I tried to call it in. Following the sound meant leaving the established trail and heading into unmarked territory, but protocol said any sign of human distress took priority over search patterns. I marked my GPS coordinates and pushed through a wall of sword fern that left moisture soaking through my uniform shirt, the crying growing louder and more desperate with each step I took deeper into the green twilight. My emergency whistle bounced against my chest as I moved, and I found myself checking the bear spray on my belt every few seconds, though something told me bears were the least of my concerns in these woods. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice calm and authoritative. "Are you hurt? I'm a park ranger. I'm here to help." The crying stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence so complete it felt like the forest was holding its breath. And then a small voice answered from somewhere ahead. "Mister? Mister, I'm lost and I'm scared." The voice was sweet, innocent, exactly what you'd expect from a frightened child. But something about it made the hair on my arms stand up like I'd just walked through a spider web. I pushed through another thicket of undergrowth and found myself in a small clearing where the afternoon sunlight filtered down in sickly yellow beams. And there she was, a little girl in a faded pink dress, maybe 9 years old, with tangled blonde hair and dirt-stained cheeks wet with tears. She was sitting on a fallen log, her small shoulders shaking with sobs. And when she looked up at me with big blue eyes, every protective instinct in my body screamed at me to scoop her up and carry her to safety. But something was wrong with her shadow. It stretched too long across the forest floor, reaching toward me like grasping fingers even though the sun was directly overhead. "It's okay, sweetie," I said, approaching slowly with my hands visible, the way I'd been trained to approach frightened children. "What's your name? How did you get out here all by yourself?" She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, leaving a smear of something that looked too dark to be snot. And when she smiled at me, I noticed her teeth seemed too sharp for a little girl. "My name is Sarah," she whispered, her voice carrying farther than it should in the dense woods. "I've been lost for so long, mister. Will you help me find my way home?" The smart thing would have been to radio for backup, but my equipment was dead, and this child needed immediate assistance. At least that's what I told myself as I knelt down to her level, close enough to smell something sour and wrong on her breath. "Of course I'll help you," I said, forcing my voice to stay gentle even as every nerve ending in my body was screaming danger signals. "But first, have you seen a young woman come through here? About 19, brown hair, wearing a blue jacket?" Sarah's head tilted to one side like a curious bird, and for just a moment, her innocent expression flickered into something else. Something ancient and hungry that made my blood run cold. "The pretty lady?" Sarah asked, and her voice seemed to echo from multiple directions at once. "Oh yes, we found her first. She's playing with us now, down in the special place where all the lost children go." The temperature in the clearing dropped 20 degrees in an instant, my breath misting in the suddenly Arctic air, and when I blinked, 3 more children had materialized at the edge of the tree line. A boy about 10 with hollow eyes, twin girls holding hands and grinning with too many teeth, all of them wearing clothes from decades past and staring at me with the patient hunger of predators. My hand went instinctively to my sidearm, but before I could draw it, Sarah giggled, a sound like broken glass in a garbage disposal, and said, "Don't be scared, Mr. Ranger. We just want to play. We've been waiting so long for someone new to join our games." The other children began moving closer, their bare feet making no sound on the forest floor, and I realized with horror that none of them were casting shadows despite the bright afternoon sun. Their skin had a waxy, translucent quality that reminded me of old museum displays. And when the boy smiled, I could see the back of his throat was black as midnight. "I need to find Alexis," I managed to say, backing toward the tree line as the children formed a loose circle around me, their movements too fluid and coordinated to be natural. "Where is she? What did you do with her?" Sarah clapped her hands together in delight, the sound echoing like gunshots in the unnatural quiet. And when she opened her mouth to speak, I could see something writhing in the darkness beyond her teeth. "She's with the others now, the grown-ups who take care of us. They're getting her ready for tonight's celebration. It's been so long since we had a proper feast." The word feast hit me like a physical blow, and suddenly I understood why the local rangers went quiet when certain subjects came up, why there were gaps in the trail maps for this section of the forest, why my predecessor had taken early retirement after only 6 months on the job. These weren't lost children. They were bait, lures used by something much worse to draw in victims like Alexis, like me. The realization must have shown on my face because Sarah's innocent expression melted away entirely, revealing something that might have been beautiful once but had been twisted by decades of unthinkable acts into a mask of corrupted innocence. "Run, rabbit," she whispered, and her voice was no longer that of a child but something ancient and malevolent wearing a child's face. "Run fast, run far, but remember, these are our woods now, and we know every tree, every shadow, every place you might try to hide." I ran. Branches tore at my uniform as I crashed through the underbrush, my ranger training forgotten in the face of primal terror that reduced me to nothing more than prey fleeing from predators. Behind me I could hear them laughing, the sound of children at play, but there was nothing innocent about the cruel delight in their voices as they began to follow. My lungs burned as I gasped for air that tasted like grave dirt, and every step sent shockwaves of pain up my exhausted legs. But I didn't dare slow down because I could hear them getting closer, their bare feet slapping against the forest floor in a rhythm that sounded almost like applause. My radio suddenly crackled to life with a burst of static-filled voices, and for a moment hope flared in my chest until I realized the voices were wrong. Children's voices giggling and singing nursery rhymes in languages I didn't recognize, the words seeming to burrow into my brain like parasites. I ripped the radio off my belt and hurled it away, but the singing continued, coming from the trees themselves now, from the earth beneath my feet, from inside my own skull where it had taken root and begun to grow. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Luke Harrison's situation? Comment below. The trail I'd been following had vanished completely, leaving me lost in a maze of identical trees that seemed to shift positions when I wasn't looking directly at them. My GPS was spinning wildly, unable to lock onto satellites through the canopy that had somehow grown thicker and darker in the past few minutes. And when I checked my watch, the hands were spinning backwards through time zones that didn't exist. The children's laughter was coming from all around me now, sometimes close enough that I could feel their breath on the back of my neck, sometimes so distant it might have been memory or imagination. That's when I smelled the smoke, wood smoke with an undercurrent of something else, something that made my stomach clench with nausea. The smell of burned hair and meat, of ceremonies that should never be performed under any god's sky. Following the smell meant moving toward whatever nightmare the children had been leading me to, but it also meant finding Alexis, and despite everything I'd witnessed, I couldn't abandon her to whatever fate awaited in that clearing. My service weapon felt pathetically inadequate against entities that cast no shadows, but the weight of it in my hand provided some small comfort as I pushed deeper into woods that no longer followed natural laws. The trees began to thin out, and I found myself approaching a clearing much larger than the one where I'd first encountered Sarah. Ancient Douglas firs formed a perfect circle around open ground that had been beaten bare by countless feet over what must have been decades, and in the center stood a structure that made my mind recoil from fully processing what I was seeing. It might have been an altar once, carved from black stone that seemed to drink in the fading daylight, but it had been modified over the years with additions that spoke of rituals best left unimaginable. Alexis was there. She was alive, barely, suspended above the altar by ropes that bit deep into her wrists and ankles, her hiking clothes torn and stained with blood that looked black in the strange twilight that filled the clearing. Her eyes were open, but unfocused, and when she saw me stumbling into the clearing, she tried to scream but only managed to whisper, "Luke, don't... It's a trap. They wanted you to find me." Her voice was raw, as if she'd been screaming for hours, and I could see symbols carved into her exposed skin, fresh wounds that wept blood in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The children were all there too, dozens of them now, standing in perfect silence around the perimeter of the clearing like some nightmare version of Ring Around the Rosie. Sarah stood directly in front of the altar, no longer bothering to maintain her innocent facade. Her true face revealed as something that had never been human, despite its childlike proportions. Behind her, partially hidden in the shadows cast by the ancient trees, I caught glimpses of the others she'd mentioned. Tall figures in dark robes whose faces were mercifully hidden, but whose presence radiated a cold malevolence that made my skin crawl. "Welcome, Ranger Harrison," Sarah said, her voice now a harmonious blend of child and something far older. "We've been expecting you. Alexis has told us so much about your dedication to your job, your willingness to go beyond the call of duty to save the innocent." She gestured toward the suspended girl with mock reverence. "She'll make such a lovely addition to our family once the ritual is complete. And you, well, you'll have the honor of witnessing something truly special." One of the robed figures stepped forward, and I caught a glimpse of what lay beneath its hood. Not a face, but a writhing mass of shadows and teeth that seemed to exist in more dimensions than my eyes could process. When it spoke, its voice was like grinding stone. "The harvest moon rises in 1 hour. The sacrifice must be completed before midnight, or we wait another year for the conjunction." The words sent ice through my veins because I understood their implication. This wasn't just about Alexis anymore. This was about something much larger, a ritual that had been planned for months, maybe years. My finger found the trigger of my service weapon, but before I could draw it, the children began to move. Not running or walking, but flowing like water across the ground, their movements coordinated with inhuman precision as they closed the distance between us. I managed to get off 2 shots before they reached me, the muzzle flashes illuminating faces that shifted between innocent and monstrous with each strobe of light. But the bullets passed through them without effect, striking the trees behind with sounds like breaking bones. Small hands grabbed my arms and legs with strength that belonged in adult bodies, their fingers burning cold against my skin as they dragged me toward the altar where Alexis hung suspended above the black stone. I fought against them with everything I had, years of ranger training and desperate father's fury, but there were too many and they felt no pain, showed no fatigue, moved with the relentless purpose of machines programmed for a single task. Sarah walked alongside us as they carried me, her child's face now wearing an expression of ancient satisfaction. "Don't feel bad about failing," she said, reaching out to pat my cheek with fingers that left frostbite burns on my skin. "You've actually succeeded beyond our wildest hopes. You see, we needed someone pure of heart, someone genuinely trying to save an innocent life. Your noble intentions will make the ritual so much more potent." As we reached the altar, I could see the symbols carved into its surface more clearly, geometric patterns that seemed to shift and writhe when viewed directly, sigils that predated human civilization and spoke of hungers that should have been forgotten. The robed figures formed a circle around the altar, their chants rising in harmonies that made reality itself seem to shiver and bend. Above us, the moon was indeed rising, fuller and redder than any moon should be, its light casting everything in the clearing in shades of blood and shadow. Alexis's eyes found mine as the children lifted me onto the altar beside her, and in that moment I saw not just terror but a desperate plea. She was begging me not just to save her life, but to find some way to stop what was about to happen here. That's when I remembered my daughter Emma's voice from our last phone call, just before my shift started. "Daddy, when you're scared, just remember that love is stronger than anything bad." Mommy told me that, and she's never wrong about important stuff. The memory hit me like lightning, cutting through the supernatural dread that had been clouding my thoughts, and I realized that Sarah had made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed my noble intentions were about duty and heroism, but they weren't. They were about love. Love for my own children, who deserved a world where creatures like these couldn't exist. Love for Alexis, a stranger who'd become my responsibility the moment I'd taken this job. Love for every parent who'd ever wondered if their child would come home safe from the woods. That love didn't make me pure or noble. It made me furious, and fury was something I could use. I waited until the chanting reached its crescendo, until the robed figures were completely focused on their ritual, and then I rolled off the altar and grabbed the emergency flare from my belt. The magnesium ignited with a brilliant white light that sent the children shrieking backward, their false flesh sizzling wherever the light touched them. Sarah's scream was like breaking glass as half her face melted away, revealing the writhing darkness beneath. And in that moment of chaos, I lunged upward and managed to cut through the rope holding Alexis's right hand. "The light!" I shouted as she fumbled with her other restraints. "They can't stand real light." I had 2 more flares in my belt and I ignited them both simultaneously, filling the clearing with blazing illumination that drove the creatures back to the tree line. The robed figures were writhing and smoking, their forms becoming less solid as the light washed over them, and even the altar itself seemed to be cracking under the pure white radiance. But our victory was temporary. I could already see the flares beginning to dim, and the creatures were regrouping at the edge of the clearing, waiting for darkness to return. "Can you run?" I asked Alexis as she dropped from the altar, her legs barely supporting her weight. "I think so," she whispered, but I could see she was in no condition for the kind of desperate flight we'd need to escape these woods alive. That's when I heard the helicopters. The sound of rotors cutting through air had never been more beautiful, and as the search and rescue birds came thundering over the tree line with their spotlights blazing, the creatures began to dissolve like smoke in the wind. The children's forms became translucent, their faces shifting between innocence and horror one last time before they faded entirely, and even Sarah managed only one final curse before the darkness that had been wearing her face for decades finally dissipated into nothing. The rescue team found us huddled together beside the black altar, Alexis barely conscious, and me babbling about children who weren't children and rituals that predated recorded history. The official report listed it as exposure and hypothermia, complicated by hallucinations brought on by exhaustion and stress. The altar was described as an unusual rock formation of possible Native American origin, and the clearing was marked as off-limits pending archaeological survey, a survey that I knew would never happen. I transferred out of Blackwood National Forest the next week, citing family considerations, and I never went back to those woods. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon is particularly full and red, I think I can still hear children laughing in the darkness outside my windows. And I know that somewhere out there, in forests where the shadows grow too long and the silence runs too deep, they're still waiting for the next noble fool who thinks love and good intentions are enough to stand against the dark. The thing is, sometimes they are. Sometimes love really is stronger than anything bad, just like my Emma said. But love alone isn't enough. You need light, real light. The kind that burns away illusions and reveals truth in all its terrible clarity. And you need to remember that the monsters in the woods aren't always the ones with claws and fangs. Sometimes they're the ones with innocent faces and tears in their eyes calling for help in voices that sound just like your own children. And those are the monsters that are hardest to fight, because saving them means admitting that some innocence once lost can never be reclaimed. Alexis Johnson survived, though she still wakes screaming some nights and refuses to go camping anymore. We don't talk about what happened in that clearing, but sometimes she sends me pictures of the sunrise from her apartment window, and I understand that she's telling me she's still fighting her way back to the light. As for me, I'm a city park ranger now, working in places where the only shadows are cast by streetlights and the only children playing after dark are heading home to their families. It's safer work, quieter work, but every morning when I put on my uniform and kiss my wife and daughter goodbye, I remember that somewhere out there, in the deep woods where no trails lead, ancient hungers are still waiting for the next lost soul to wander into their web. And I pray to whatever gods still listen that the next ranger to answer that call will remember to bring enough light to burn away the lies. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to those cult children. I read every single one. My name is Cole Harrison, and I should have forgotten the case of Madison Foster, but something brought me back to that damned forest. It had been 4 months since the 22-year-old grad student vanished from the Blackwater Trail in Olympic National Park. 4 months since I'd meticulously cataloged every piece of evidence, cross-referenced every witness statement, and mapped every possible route she could have taken. 4 months since my colleagues started calling my investigation obsessive and counterproductive. But yesterday, a hiker found Madison's smartphone wedged in a crevice near Devil's Backbone Ridge, 3 miles north of where she'd supposedly disappeared. The phone had been factory reset, but the SIM card contained a single video file dated the night she vanished. I wish I'd never watched that fucking video. The timestamp read, 11:47 p.m. Madison's terrified face filled the screen, her usually perfect makeup streaked with dirt and tears. Behind her, something moved in the darkness, something that shouldn't exist. "If anyone finds this," she whispered, her voice cracking, "don't come looking for me. Don't come to the old church. It's awake now. The thing they summoned in 1966, it's awake, and it's hungry." The video cut to black, but in those final frames, I'd seen it. A shadow that moved independently of any light source, reaching toward her with fingers that stretched impossibly long. My supervisor, Chief Ranger Patricia Valdez, had taken one look at the video and assigned it to the FBI. "Probably a hoax," she'd said, but I caught the tremor in her voice. Some sick joke by whoever took her. But I knew better. I'd spent weeks researching the local folklore, cross-referencing historical records that others dismissed as nonsense. The old Pentecostal church on Devil's Backbone had burned down in 1967, just months after Reverend Samuel Blackwood attempted what local newspapers euphemistically called unconventional spiritual practices. 7 people died in that fire. 7 people who'd supposedly been trying to banish something that Blackwood had accidentally summoned. My colleagues thought my research was academic masturbation, but Madison Foster was brilliant. A PhD candidate in anthropology studying Pacific Northwest indigenous legends. She would have known about the 1966 incident. She would have known exactly what that shadow represented. I strapped on my duty belt, feeling the familiar weight of my Glock 22 pepper spray and emergency beacon. My backpack contained enough supplies for 3 days. Water purification tablets, MREs, first aid kit, emergency shelter, and my grandfather's silver crucifix. The one thing my analytical mind couldn't explain away as superstition. The drive to Devil's Backbone took 47 minutes through winding mountain roads. My hands gripped the steering wheel of my patrol SUV until my knuckles turned white, while October rain drummed against the windshield like skeletal fingers. The parking area at the trailhead was empty, except for a rusted Toyota Corolla with expired tags. I ran the plates through dispatch, reported stolen 3 weeks ago in Seattle. The vehicle's interior reeked of sulfur and something else, something organic and wrong, like meat left to rot in summer heat. I clicked my handheld radio. Unit 47 to dispatch, beginning search operation at Devil's Backbone Trail. GPS coordinates 47 Toito 21 degree N, 123 6044 degree W. Copy, Unit 47, weather advisory in effect. Temperature dropping to 34 degrees by midnight. The trail began innocently enough, a well-maintained path through dense Douglas fir and western red cedar. But as I climbed higher, following Madison's likely route based on her research notes, the forest changed. The undergrowth grew thicker, darker. Bird calls that should have been commonplace, Steller's jays, red crossbills, varied thrushes, were completely absent. Even the insects had gone silent. My breath misted in the rapidly cooling air as I consulted my GPS unit. According to Madison's research, the burned church sat approximately 2.3 miles northeast of the main trail, accessible only by an unmarked path that local rangers had been informally discouraging hikers from using since the 1970s. I found the turnoff at mile marker 3.7, just as Madison's notes had indicated. A barely visible deer trail branched into thick forest marked only by 3 deep scratches carved into a massive cedar trunk. The scratches were fresh, maybe a few months old. Each was exactly 7 inches long, the same length as the claw marks found on the inside of the burned church in 1967. As I followed the hidden trail, my analytical mind cataloged every abnormality. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees in the past hour, well beyond what atmospheric conditions should produce. My compass needle spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. Most disturbing, the trees grew increasingly malformed, twisted branches that formed impossible angles, bark that oozed a dark substance that smelled like copper and decay. After 90 minutes of hiking, I reached a clearing where the ruins of Blackwood's Pentecostal church still stood. The stone foundation remained intact, along with portions of the outer walls. 53 years of weather had failed to completely erase scorch marks that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. In the center of the ruins, someone had arranged stones in a perfect circle, with symbols carved into each rock, symbols that hurt to look at directly. Madison's backpack lay just outside the stone circle. I approached carefully, photographing everything with my department-issued camera. The backpack contained her research materials, camping supplies, and a leather-bound journal filled with increasingly frantic handwriting. The final entry, dated the night she disappeared, made my blood freeze. It spoke to me in dreams for 3 nights before I came here. Not words, something deeper. It showed me what Blackwood really summoned in 1966. Not a demon from Christian mythology, but something older. Something that existed before human language developed words for evil. The indigenous Skokomish tribes had stories about this place. They called it the Hungry Shadow and considered these woods forbidden. Blackwood was too arrogant to research local legends. He thought he was summoning a biblical demon he could control with prayer and holy water. He was wrong. It's been sleeping since the fire, but something woke it up. Climate change, maybe, or just the natural cycle of its consciousness. It doesn't matter. It's awake now, and it's hungry, and it chose me. If someone finds this, know that I came here willingly. It promised to show me truths that academic research could never reveal. It promised to teach me the real history of this land, the history written in blood and shadow. I can feel it calling now. The sun is setting and shadows are moving wrong. I'm going into the church ruins. If I don't come back, burn this place to bedrock, salt the earth, never let anyone build here again. Madison Foster, October 14th, 2019, 7:23 p.m. P.S. Tell my parents I love them. Tell them I wasn't crazy. A branch snapped behind me. I spun around, drawing my sidearm in one fluid motion. The forest had grown unnaturally dark, despite being only 4:30 p.m. Shadows stretched in directions that defied the sun's position, reaching toward me with an almost predatory intelligence. "Madison?" I called out, my voice echoing strangely in the clearing. "Madison Foster, if you can hear me, I'm here to help." Laughter answered. Not Madison's voice, but something that wore her voice like an ill-fitting mask. The sound came from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through the ground beneath my boots. "She can't hear you anymore, Cole Harrison." The voice spoke my name with intimate familiarity, as if we were old friends. I raised my weapon toward the church ruins, where shadows were beginning to coalesce into something resembling human form. She gave herself to me willingly. The thing continued, its voice shifting between Madison's terrified whisper and something infinitely older. Such a brilliant mind, so full of questions. I've been answering those questions for 4 months now. A figure stepped from behind the ruined altar. Madison Foster, or something wearing her body like a costume. Her skin had turned the color of old parchment, stretched too tight over bones that had grown longer than human anatomy should allow. Her eyes were gone, replaced by swirling voids that seemed to pull at the edges of my vision. But worst of all, she was smiling. She wanted to know the truth about this place. Not, Madison said, taking a step toward me. Her joints moved wrong, bending in directions that made my stomach lurch. So I showed her. "Would you like to see, Cole? You've been searching for answers just like she did." I kept my weapon trained on the abomination, but my analytical mind was already cataloging the impossibilities. Madison had been missing for 4 months, but her body showed no signs of decomposition. Instead, it seemed to be transforming into something else entirely. "Where is she?" I demanded. "Where is the real Madison Foster?" Not Madison tilted her head at an angle that should have snapped her neck. "She's here, Cole. Every brilliant thought, every memory, every moment of terror and realization. I collect consciousness like you collect evidence. She's part of me now." The thing that wore Madison's face began to change more dramatically. Her skin split along invisible seams, revealing something writhing underneath, something that had never been human. The transformation was visceral, brutal. Bones cracked and reformed. Muscle tissue separated and reconstructed itself into new configurations. The sounds it made, wet, organic, wrong, would haunt me for the rest of my life. I fired 3 rounds center mass. The bullets passed through the creature without any apparent effect, embedding themselves in the stone wall behind it, with metallic clangs that echoed like funeral bells. "Iron won't work," it said, its voice now a harmony of Madison's terror and something infinitely ancient. "Holy symbols won't work. This isn't the demon your Christian folklore prepared you for, Cole. I predate your religions by millennia." The creature's transformation accelerated. Madison's familiar features melted away like wax, revealing something that had too many teeth and not enough skin. Its limbs stretched, joints multiplying until it resembled a massive spider made of human parts. But the worst part was the eyes, dozens of them, opening across its malformed body, and each one held Madison's consciousness, trapped and screaming. "She's still in there," I whispered, lowering my weapon. The analytical part of my mind was cataloging every detail, even as the primitive parts screamed for me to run. "You're keeping her alive." The demon's laughter shook leaves from the surrounding trees. "Alive? Such a limited concept. She exists in a state beyond your binary understanding of life and death. She experiences every sensation, every emotion, amplified beyond human tolerance. She feels my hunger when I feed. She shares my memories from the centuries before your species learned to make tools. One of Madison's eyes, embedded in the creature's shoulder, focused on me with desperate recognition. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, trying to form words. "Let her go," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "Take me instead." The demon considered this, its massive form swaying hypnotically. "You would make a poor replacement, Cole Harrison." Madison came to me willingly, driven by academic curiosity and hubris. "But you're here from duty, from guilt. You blame yourself for not finding her sooner." The creature was right, and that realization hit me like a physical blow. I had failed Madison Foster. My obsessive research and meticulous evidence collection had been useless when it mattered most. "Yes," the demon continued, reading my thoughts with disgusting intimacy. "I can feel your self-doubt. Your colleagues think you're too analytical, too obsessed with details they consider irrelevant. They don't respect your intelligence because you're young, because you ask too many questions." It was moving closer now, and I could smell it. Sulfur and decay and something else. Something that reminded me of my childhood bedroom during the fever dreams that followed my grandmother's funeral. "But I respect intelligence, Cole. I collect brilliant minds like others collect stamps. Madison has been telling me about your research methods, your attention to patterns others miss. She's quite impressed with your dedication." Madison's eye in the creature's shoulder moved frantically, and I realized she was trying to warn me. Her mouth formed a single word, over and over: "Run." Instead, I reached into my shirt and pulled out my grandfather's silver crucifix. The demon recoiled as if I'd struck it, its multiple limbs thrashing as it scrambled backward toward the stone circle. "Interesting," it hissed, though I could hear pain in its voice. Not the symbol itself, but the faith behind it. Your grandfather's faith, passed down through generations. A faith you don't even consciously share. I pressed forward, holding the cross like a weapon. The demon's form began to shift again, becoming less solid, more shadow-like. "You can banish me temporarily," it conceded, "but you cannot destroy me, and you cannot free her." Madison Foster's consciousness is woven into my being now. To destroy me would mean destroying her completely. I stopped advancing, my mind racing through possibilities. The demon was right. I couldn't kill it without killing Madison. But maybe there was another way. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Cole Harrison's situation? Comment below. "What do you want?" I asked. The demon's laughter was like glass breaking in reverse. "I want to feed, to grow, to collect more brilliant minds for my eternal library of consciousness. Madison was just the beginning." "And if I help you feed?" The creature paused, considering. "You would help me hunt? Bring me other prey?" "I would bring you someone whose consciousness you'd prize even more than Madison's," I said, the lie burning in my throat. "Someone whose analytical mind has solved cases that stumped entire departments." The demon's eyes, all of them, including Madison's, focused on me with predatory interest. "You speak of yourself." "I speak of a trade, my consciousness for hers." The creature's form solidified again, becoming more recognizably Madison-shaped, though the proportions remained wrong. "You would sacrifice yourself? Your family? Your career? Your future?" I thought of my wife Sarah, probably cooking dinner right now, wondering why I hadn't called. I thought of our daughter Emma, only 4 years old, who still believed her daddy could solve any problem. "Yes," I said. The demon smiled with too many teeth. "Very well. Step into the circle." I approached the stone circle where ancient symbols seemed to writhe in my peripheral vision. As I crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped another 20 degrees, and I felt something fundamental change in the air around me. A thickness, like breathing water. The demon extended what had once been Madison's hand toward me. Her skin was ice cold and felt like leather left too long in the sun. "Close your eyes, Cole Harrison." Let me show you what Madison saw. Against every instinct, I closed my eyes. The visions that followed defied description. I saw the true history of this land. Not the sanitized version taught in schools, but the reality written in blood and shadow. I witnessed the indigenous people's desperate attempts to contain something that had crawled up from deep places in the earth. I experienced Reverend Blackwood's hubris as he attempted to bind an entity that predated his understanding of good and evil. I felt the 7 people burn alive as the demon's true form was revealed for the first time in centuries, and through it all, I felt Madison's consciousness screaming silently, trapped in an eternal moment of realization that everything she'd believed about reality was wrong. When I opened my eyes, the demon had changed again. Now it wore my face alongside Madison's, a grotesque amalgamation of features that should never exist on the same skull. "Welcome to eternity, Cole Harrison," it said with our combined voices. But as the demon's consciousness began to merge with mine, I felt something it hadn't anticipated. My analytical mind, the same methodical thinking my colleagues found so tiresome, began dissecting the creature's mental architecture like a complex case file. The demon wasn't a single entity. It was a composite being, built from the consciousness of everyone it had consumed over the centuries. Each mind remained distinct within its structure, prisoners in individual cells of an impossible mental prison. And if each consciousness remained separate, then they could be freed separately. I focused on the one memory the demon hadn't meant to share, the moment in 1967 when the church fire had nearly destroyed it. The flames hadn't been ordinary fire. They'd been blessed by Father Miguel Santos, the Catholic priest who'd tried to help Reverend Blackwood contain his mistake. Salt and iron hadn't worked because this wasn't a traditional demon. But holy fire, fire blessed by genuine faith, could sever the connections between the imprisoned consciousness and the demon's core being. "Clever boy," the demon said, reading my thoughts. "But you have no fire here, no blessed flame, no way to..." I pulled the emergency flare from my belt and struck it against the rough stone. Red phosphorus light blazed in the growing darkness, and I pressed the burning flare against my grandfather's silver crucifix. "In the name of everyone you've taken," I said, advancing on the creature. "In the name of Madison Foster and the 7 who died in 1967, I cast you back to whatever hell spawned you." The demon shrieked as the blessed flame touched its composite body. The sound was like 1,000 voices screaming in harmony, and among them, I heard Madison calling my name. "Cole, the circle. Break the circle." I understood immediately. The stone circle was the demon's anchor to this reality, the focal point that allowed it to maintain its hold on the physical world. I kicked the nearest stone with all my strength, feeling my boot connect with something that cracked like old bones. The carved symbol on the rock split in half, and immediately the demon's form began to destabilize. "You cannot banish me," it howled. "I am eternal. I am..." I kicked the second stone, then the third. Each time a symbol cracked, another of the demon's prisoners fell free. I saw them, translucent figures of men and women from across the centuries, standing in the clearing for just a moment before dissolving into peaceful light. When I kicked the 7th and final stone, the demon's form collapsed entirely. Madison's body hit the ground hard, completely human again, her chest rising and falling with natural breath. I dropped beside her, checking for a pulse. It was strong and steady. "Madison, can you hear me?" Her eyes opened, her own brown eyes, not the swirling voids I'd seen before. She looked up at me with confusion and terror. "Cole? How did you..." She sat up suddenly, looking around the clearing. "Where is it? The demon. Where did it go?" The ruins of the church were empty now. Even the stone circle had crumbled to ordinary rocks. The oppressive atmosphere that had pressed down on the clearing was gone, replaced by normal October evening air. "It's over," I said, helping her to her feet. "You've been missing for 4 months." Madison stared at me in shock. 4 months? But I was only... It felt like days. Terrible, endless days, but... She touched her face, her arms, confirming that her body was her own again. "How did you find me?" I handed her the leather journal from her backpack. "You left excellent research notes." As we hiked back toward the main trail, Madison told me fragments of what she remembered from her months of imprisonment. The demon had indeed been feeding off her consciousness, experiencing her memories and emotions while keeping her aware of every horrific detail. "It wasn't evil in any human sense," she said, stumbling over roots in the growing darkness. "It was hungry, like a shark or a virus, just following its nature. But that somehow made it worse." By the time we reached my patrol vehicle, Madison had begun to process what had happened to her. The trauma would take years to heal, if it ever did completely, but she was alive herself, free. I radioed dispatch as we drove back toward town. "Unit 47 to base, I have Madison Foster. She's alive and in good condition. Requesting medical evaluation and transport." "Copy that, Unit 47. Outstanding work." But as I hung up the radio, I noticed something that made my analytical mind pause. The dashboard clock read 11:47 p.m., the exact timestamp from Madison's final video. And in the rearview mirror, I could swear I saw something moving in the shadows behind us, keeping pace with our vehicle. The demon had been banished, not destroyed, and it had learned something from our encounter. Learned that modern human consciousness contained complexities it had never encountered before. It would be back. Maybe not for years, maybe not for decades, but it would be back, hungry as always, and next time it would be prepared for someone like me. I pressed the accelerator harder, speeding through the dark mountain roads toward the safety of town lights. Beside me, Madison had fallen asleep, exhausted by her ordeal but finally at peace. And in my pocket, my grandfather's silver crucifix had grown warm against my chest. Not hot, just warm, like a reminder that some battles are worth fighting, even when victory is temporary. My name is Cole Harrison, and I should have forgotten the case of Madison Foster, but I'm glad I didn't. Because sometimes the cases that haunt us are the ones that matter most, even when they're never really closed. The end. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like if you want more terrifying Ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror. And comment your theory about what really happened to Madison Foster. I read every single one. My name is Ethan Rodriguez, and this was the 6th hour searching for Emma Hartwell in the trails of Olympic National Park. My Garmin GPS showed 11.3 miles covered since dawn. My Danner boots were soaked through from the morning dew, and that familiar metallic taste of exhaustion was coating my tongue like copper pennies. But something else was coating my senses too, something that made my ranger instincts scream like a fire alarm in the night. The radio on my tactical vest crackled with static. "Unit 7, this is base. Any signs of the missing hiker? Over." I pressed the transmit button, my Motorola APX 6000 heavy in my grip. "Base, this is Rodriguez. Negative contact. Just finished grid search of Sector Charlie 4, moving to Delta 1, over." "Copy that, Unit 7. Family's getting desperate. Clock's ticking." Clock's ticking. If they only knew how right they were. Emma Hartwell, 23, brunette, 5'6", last seen wearing a red North Face jacket and black hiking pants. She'd been missing since yesterday afternoon when she failed to check in at the Hoh River Ranger Station. Her boyfriend reported her overdue at 8 p.m., panic cracking his voice over the phone. Standard procedure, standard search, standard rescue. Except nothing about this felt standard. I'd been a ranger for 8 years, and my colleagues at Olympic knew about my intuition, that sixth sense that made me the guy they called when shit got weird. The guy who found the lost kid in Sector 12 when search dogs couldn't pick up a scent. The guy who somehow knew to check the cave system when that rock climber went missing near Hurricane Ridge. And right now that sixth sense was screaming. The Douglas fir trees felt wrong. Too quiet. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter. None of the usual forest soundtrack that should be echoing through these moss-draped corridors. Even my footsteps seemed muffled, like the forest was holding its breath. I checked my iPhone. 2:47 p.m., October 13th, 2018. Full battery, 4 bars of signal. The weather app showed clear skies, but overhead the canopy was so thick that patches of afternoon sunlight looked like scattered coins on the forest floor. My stomach growled. I'd grabbed a protein bar and black coffee at 6 a.m., nothing since. The Nalgene bottle clipped to my pack was getting light, maybe 8 ounces left. Dehydration was setting in. I could feel the beginnings of a headache threading behind my eyes. But I couldn't stop. Not when Emma's mother had called me directly this morning, her voice breaking. "Please, Mr. Rodriguez. Everyone else thinks she just wandered off trail, but I know my daughter. She's experienced. She wouldn't just, please find my baby." I'd promised, looked her in the eye and promised. My radio crackled again. "Unit 7, be advised. Weather service shows storm system moving in. ETA 4 hours. Wind gusts up to 45 mph predicted. Copy, base." I wiped sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand, even though the October air was crisp enough to see my breath. That's when I smelled it. Blood, faint but unmistakable, carried on a breeze that shouldn't exist in this windless hollow. My ranger training kicked in, predator kill, probably deer, maybe elk. But my sixth sense said otherwise. My sixth sense said human. I followed the scent northeast off the main trail, pushing through sword ferns and devil's club that scraped against my Kevlar pants. The smell grew stronger, mixing with something else. Something wild. Something that made the hair on my arms stand up beneath my long-sleeve uniform shirt. 20 yards into the underbrush, I found Emma's backpack. A purple Osprey Atmos, torn open like a Christmas present, ripped apart by an impatient child. Contents scattered. Water bottle, energy bars, a first aid kit, and her iPhone 8 with the screen cracked like spiderweb glass. But no blood on the pack itself. The blood smell was coming from somewhere else. I keyed my radio. "Base, this is Unit 7. I've located the missing person's equipment. Purple backpack, contents scattered. Requesting backup and forensics team. GPS coordinates N47-49-372, W123-56.847. Over. Unit 7, backup is en route. ETA 25 minutes. Do not proceed alone. Over." But I was already moving deeper into the woods, following that copper and iron scent that was making my stomach clench. My Streamlight Pro-Tac flashlight beam cut through the growing shadows between the trees. Something had dragged Emma away from her pack, something strong enough to tear open a quality hiking backpack like tissue paper. The blood trail led to a clearing where the afternoon sun actually penetrated the canopy. And there, pressed into the soft earth, were tracks. At first glance, they looked human. Barefoot impressions in the mud, roughly size 11. But the proportions were wrong. Too wide, toes too long. And the claw marks, 5 deep gouges extending from each toe impression, like someone had dragged steel spikes through the wet earth. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears. 8 years of ranger experience, and I'd never seen tracks like these. The rational part of my brain cycled through possibilities. Bear, cougar, maybe someone playing an elaborate prank. But my sixth sense knew better. I took photos with my iPhone, the camera flash reflecting off the wet mud. Then I followed the tracks deeper into the forest, my radio chatter with bass becoming increasingly distant and staticky. The trees here were older, thicker, their bark scarred with deep claw marks 8 feet off the ground. "Base, this is Unit 7. I'm tracking unusual signs, possible predator involvement. How copy? Over." Static. Just static. I checked my phone, no signal. The green bars had disappeared completely. That's when I heard Emma scream. Not a distant cry for help. Not a shout of relief at seeing a ranger. A scream of pure animalistic terror that cut through the forest silence like a chainsaw through silk. The sound made every muscle in my body seize up, made my mouth fill with the taste of adrenaline and copper fear. The scream came from the north, maybe quarter mile. I ran, crashing through underbrush, my 35-pound pack bouncing against my spine. Branches whipped against my face, drawing thin lines of blood across my cheeks. My Danner boots slipped on wet leaves, and I went down hard, my left knee slamming into a buried root. Pain shot up my leg like electricity, but I kept moving. Emma was alive and in trouble. Another scream. Closer now, but different. Lower in pitch, almost guttural. I burst into another clearing and stopped dead. Emma Hartwell knelt in the center of the open space, her red North Face jacket torn to shreds, her hiking pants shredded and soaked with blood. But she wasn't screaming anymore. She wasn't moving at all. Her eyes were wide open, staring at something behind me. I turned around. The thing standing at the edge of the tree line had once been human. The basic shape was there: 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso. But everything else was wrong. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, its body covered in coarse, dark fur that glistened with blood. Its arms hung down past its knees, ending in hands that were more like claws, each finger tipped with yellowed talons 3 inches long. But it was the face that made my bladder almost let go. The skull had elongated, pushing the eyes back and stretching the jaw forward into a snout filled with teeth like broken glass. But I could still see traces of humanity in those amber eyes. Still see the intelligence that was definitely, absolutely, completely insane. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Ethan Rodriguez's situation? Comment below. The creature, the werewolf, because what the hell else could it be, tilted its head and smiled at me with those razor teeth. Then it spoke, its voice a grinding mixture of human speech and animal growl. Ranger Rodriguez, finally. It knew my name. It had been waiting for me. Emma, I called out, not taking my eyes off the monster. Emma, can you move? She turned her head toward me, and I saw that her throat had been torn open. Not fatally. The werewolf had been careful, surgical almost. She could breathe, could probably even speak. But blood soaked the front of her shirt, and her face was white as fresh snow. He said you'd come, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Said rangers always come. The werewolf laughed, a sound like breaking glass mixed with a hyena's cackle. I told Emma here all about you, Ethan. About your gifts. About how you always find what others can't. My hand moved to the Glock 22 on my utility belt, muscle memory from countless hours of training. But even as I drew the weapon, I knew it wouldn't be enough. You don't stop something like this with standard issue .40 caliber rounds. But you see, the creature continued, taking a step forward. Tonight is special. Tonight is the peak of the full moon. And I've been so very hungry. It lunged. 7 feet of supernatural muscle and fury came at me like a freight train. I got 2 shots off, both center mass, before it hit me. The impact sent me flying backward into the trunk of a massive cedar, my spine cracking against the bark with enough force to make stars explode behind my eyes. My gun flew from my hand, disappearing somewhere in the undergrowth. The werewolf landed in a crouch 10 feet away, completely unfazed by the bullet wounds that should have dropped any normal predator. Black blood oozed from the holes in its chest, but it just grinned wider. My turn, it growled. Pain exploded across my ribs as its claws raked across my chest, shredding my uniform shirt and the Kevlar vest underneath like they were made of paper. I felt skin split, felt warm blood pour down my stomach. The smell of my own injury mixed with the creature's musk. A wild animal stench like wet fur and rotting meat. I rolled away from its second swipe, the claws missing my throat by inches and instead gouging 4 deep furrows in the cedar bark. My tactical training kicked in: stay mobile, create distance, find a weapon. But this thing was fast, faster than anything had a right to be. It caught me again across the back as I scrambled toward Emma. This time I felt the claws punch through muscle and scrape against rib bone. I screamed, couldn't help it, the pain white hot and immediate. Blood soaked through the back of my shirt, warm and sticky. Ethan! Emma's voice stronger now. The trees! Climb the trees! But the werewolf was already between me and the nearest climbable pine. It rose to its full height, blood, mine and Emma's, dripping from its claws like red paint. In the fading afternoon light, its eyes glowed like amber coals. You know what you are, don't you, Ranger? It said, advancing slowly now, savoring the hunt. What you've always been? I pressed my back against Emma, both of us trapped in the center of the clearing. My radio was nothing but static. My gun was lost. My phone had no signal. The backup I'd called for wouldn't arrive for another 15 minutes, and I'd strayed too far from my reported position for them to find us quickly. But the werewolf's question echoed in my head. What you've always been, my sixth sense, my intuition, the way I could find people when others couldn't, the way I knew things before they happened, the way Emma's mother had looked at me this morning, like she recognized something in my eyes. Family trait, I whispered, understanding flooding through me like ice water. It runs in families. The werewolf nodded, that horrible smile never wavering. Your grandmother knew. Your grandfather too before he died. The Rodriguez bloodline carries the old blood, the hunter's blood. My hands began to tingle, warmth spreading up my arms like I'd stuck them in hot water. The pain from my wounds started to fade, replaced by something else, something wild and electric and ancient. But you never learned to use it, the creature continued. Never learned to hunt. You've been a sheep pretending to be a shepherd. The tingling spread to my chest, my legs, my entire body humming with energy I'd never felt before. My vision sharpened, colors becoming more vivid. I could smell Emma's fear, could hear her heartbeat, could sense the werewolf's excitement like heat radiating from a campfire. And I could smell something else, something the creature couldn't hide, no matter how monstrous it had become. Human scent, familiar human scent. I know you, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. You're Tom Blackwood, the hiker who went missing 3 months ago. The werewolf's smile faltered for just a moment. Tom Blackwood is dead. I ate his memories. But I could see the truth now, my awakened senses cutting through the supernatural disguise like X-rays through flesh. Tom Blackwood, 34, experienced backpacker from Seattle, reported missing July 15th. We'd searched for 6 days before calling it off, assuming he'd fallen into a crevasse or been taken by a cougar. Instead, he'd been taken by something else, something that turned its victims into monsters. The curse passes through bite, I said, understanding more with each heartbeat. But it doesn't have to control you. You're choosing this. Choosing? The werewolf's roar shook leaves from the surrounding trees. You think I chose to become a monster? To hunger for human flesh? To lose everything I ever was? It lunged again, but this time I was ready. The old blood, my grandmother's gift, my family's hidden heritage. It all flooded through me like liquid fire. Time seemed to slow. I could track every movement of the werewolf's attack, could see the trajectory of its claws, could calculate exactly where it would land. I rolled left, came up in a combat crouch, and drove my elbow into the creature's solar plexus with every ounce of strength I possessed. The impact sent it staggering backward, black blood spraying from its mouth. "Emma, run!" I shouted. "Get to the main trail. Find the backup team." But she didn't run. Instead, she grabbed a fallen branch, thick as my wrist and 3 feet long, and swung it like a baseball bat into the werewolf's knee. The crack of breaking bone echoed through the clearing. Tom Blackwood howled, a sound that was pure animal agony. He went down hard, his right leg bent at an impossible angle. But even wounded, even crippled, the curse kept him fighting. He swiped at Emma with those terrible claws. I caught his arm. My hands, humming with inherited power, closed around his wrist like steel manacles. For the first time since the attack began, the werewolf looked genuinely surprised. "You feel it now," he whispered. "The awakening, the hunger. Soon, you'll understand why I chose to embrace it." "Maybe," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos raging in my bloodstream. "But I choose to fight it." I twisted his arm backward until I heard the shoulder pop out of its socket. The werewolf screamed again, but the sound was getting more human now, more like Tom Blackwood and less like the monster he'd become. "The moon will be full tonight," he gasped, his amber eyes flickering back toward human brown. "When it rises, when it calls, You'll have to choose. Fight it and go insane. Embrace it and become like me. Those are your only options now that you've awakened. My radio suddenly crackled back to life. Unit 7, this is base. Backup teams are approaching your last known position. Signal your location. Over. I looked at Emma, bloody but alive. I looked at Tom Blackwood, dying, but finally human again in his last moments. And I felt the wild energy coursing through my veins, the ancient hunger that wanted to consume everything in its path. Tonight, when the full moon rose, I would have to choose. But for now, I pressed my radio transmit button and said, "Base, this is Unit 7. I have the missing person. We're going to need medical evac. And Base, we're going to need to talk." The backup team found us 20 minutes later. Emma was rushed to Olympic Medical Center with severe lacerations but stable vital signs. Tom Blackwood was pronounced dead at the scene, officially from animal attack. The coroner never questioned why his body had reverted to completely human form. 3 weeks later, I submitted my resignation from the National Park Service. Told them I needed a career change, wanted to pursue private security work. What I actually pursued was research into my family history, into the old stories, into ways to control what I'd become, because Tom Blackwood was wrong about the choices. There was a third option, handed down through generations of my family who'd carried this burden in secret. You could learn to hunt monsters. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying Ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Emma Hartwell. I read every single one. The end. Author's note. This story draws inspiration from Pacific Northwest folklore and the real challenges faced by search and rescue personnel in our national parks. While supernatural elements are fictional, the dedication of our park rangers to find and protect missing persons is absolutely real. My name is Travis Hendricks, and I should have forgotten the case of Jessica Parker, but something brought me back to that cursed forest. It was October 23rd, 2018, 3 weeks since Jessica had vanished without a trace from the Blackwood Trail in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. 3 weeks since the official search had been called off. 3 weeks since I'd filed my final report and tried to convince myself that some people just disappear. But at 5:47 a.m. that morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica's mother. Found her journal under her bed. Last entry mentions meeting the lady in white on the trail. Please, Travis, one more try. I stared at that message for 20 minutes, black coffee going cold in my ceramic mug, the one my daughter Emma had painted for me with shaky 8-year-old hands. World's best dad, in purple letters that had faded over the years. My wife Sarah was still asleep upstairs, her breathing steady and peaceful. Normal. Safe. The smart thing would have been to delete that text. File it under grieving family grasping at straws. I'd been a ranger for 15 years, seen enough cases go cold to know when to let go. But something about those words, the lady in white, made my hands shake as I set down the coffee. By 6:30 a.m., I was back in my Ford F-150, ranger uniform pressed and badge gleaming, driving the winding road toward Cataract Falls trailhead where Jessica Parker had last been seen. The morning mist clung to the mountains like gossip, thick and persistent. My radio crackled with routine morning check-ins. Unit 12, 10-8 at Cades Cove. Copy that, Unit 12. I keyed my radio. Dispatch, Unit 7 is 10-8 at Cataract Falls, conducting follow-up investigation on Parker case. Static. Then, Unit 7, thought that case was closed. Negative. New evidence to examine. Copy that. Stay safe out there, Travis. The trailhead parking lot was empty except for maintenance vehicles and my truck. October in the Smokies meant most tourists had packed up their cameras and headed home, leaving the mountains to the locals and the dedicated hikers. And whatever else lived in these ancient woods, I shouldered my pack. 68 pounds of search and rescue gear, water, emergency supplies, and my grandfather's Winchester lever-action rifle. Dad had taught me that a smart ranger respects the mountain, but a living ranger comes prepared for anything. I'd never needed the rifle for a person, but black bears and wild boar weren't uncommon, and something told me I might need every advantage today. The Blackwood Trail stretched ahead like a question mark, disappearing into a canopy of scarlet maples and golden oaks. Fallen leaves crunched under my Danner boots with each step, creating a rhythm that should have been peaceful. Instead, it sounded like whispers, urgent, secretive, wrong. Jessica Parker had been 23, a graduate student from University of Tennessee studying forest ecology. Smart girl, experienced hiker. She'd been alone on the trail at approximately 2:30 p.m. on October 2nd, when she'd sent her last text message to her boyfriend. Beautiful day, amazing views. We'll call you tonight. She never made that call. The initial search had involved 37 volunteers, 2 helicopter flyovers, and 3 K9 units. We'd found her car at the trailhead, keys still in the ignition, wallet and phone inside. No signs of struggle, no indication she'd ever made it back from the trail. It was like the mountain had simply swallowed her whole. Half a mile up the trail, I stopped at the GPS coordinates where her water bottle had been found. 35.7 C7 degree N, 83.5 126 degree W. The bottle had been sitting on a fallen log, cap twisted on tight, still half full. Placed, not dropped. That detail had bothered me for 3 weeks, picking at my brain like a splinter. The forest around me was too quiet. In 15 years of ranging these mountains, I'd learned to read the woods like a book. Bird calls told you about weather changes. Squirrel chatter indicated predators. The absence of sound meant something was very, very wrong. Today, the silence was absolute. I pulled out my grandfather's compass. Brass and reliable, never failed me once. The needle spun lazily before settling northwest toward Widow's Creek, but something felt off about the direction, like the magnetic pull was different, stronger. Travis, where are you? I spun around, heart hammering. The voice had been clear as daylight, sweet and concerned. Female. But the trail behind me was empty. Hello? I called out, my voice echoing off the ridge. Identify yourself. Nothing. Just the whisper of wind through dying leaves. I keyed my radio. Unit 7 to dispatch, did you copy a transmission on this frequency? Negative, Unit 7, you're clear. But I'd heard it. I'd definitely heard it. A woman's voice, close enough to be standing right behind me. The kind of voice that made you want to help, to protect. The kind of voice Jessica Parker might have trusted. I moved deeper into the forest, following the trail toward the coordinates where Jessica's hiking poles had been discovered. The path grew narrower, more overgrown. Branches reached across like gnarled fingers, catching at my uniform and pack straps. The temperature was dropping, though my watch read 78 degrees, unseasonably warm for late October. My breath began to fog. At the 2-mile marker, I found the second location, 357089 again, 83.5203 W. This was where Jessica's hiking poles had been found, crossed carefully over the trail like someone had deliberately placed them as a barrier or a warning. The poles were gone now, of course, bagged as evidence weeks ago, but standing at that exact spot, I felt something shift in the air pressure, like standing too close to a thunderstorm. That electric tension that makes your skin crawl and your hair stand up. Travis, don't leave me here. This time I heard it clearly, saw my breath catch in the sudden cold. The voice came from ahead, somewhere up the trail toward Widow's Creek. Plaintive, desperate. Jessica? I called, unsnapping my radio. Jessica Parker, if that's you, identify your location. My voice echoed back, multiplied, as if the mountains were mocking me. Travis, Travis, Travis. But underneath the echo, I heard something else. Crying. Soft, feminine, heartbroken, coming from the direction of the creek. Every instinct I'd developed in 15 years told me to call for backup, to get out of these woods, to follow protocol. But the sound of that crying, So lost, so afraid, overrode my training. If Jessica Parker was alive out there, if she'd somehow survived 3 weeks in the wilderness, I wasn't leaving without her. I pushed forward, following the narrow deer path that branched off toward Widow's Creek. The crying grew louder, more urgent. My boots slipped on wet leaves, and I realized the ground was becoming marshy. Strange, given the dry autumn we'd been having. The trees closed in overhead, blocking most of the morning sunlight. My flashlight beam seemed weaker here, like the darkness was actively fighting the light. I checked my GPS, 35.7056 again, 83.5267 degree W. Still getting signal, but my phone showed no bars. Please, Travis. I'm so cold. The voice was directly ahead now, maybe 30 yards through the trees. I could see a clearing through the undergrowth and what looked like the white blur of clothing. My pulse quickened. Jessica, stay where you are. I'm coming. I crashed through the brush, branches whipping across my face, heart pounding with the possibility that this nightmare might finally be over. The clearing opened up ahead, a small meadow surrounding the dark waters of Widow's Creek. And there she was, a woman in white, standing at the water's edge with her back to me. Long dark hair hanging straight down, white dress flowing in a breeze I couldn't feel. She was perfectly still, unnaturally still, like a photograph. Jessica? I called, but quieter now. Something was wrong. The dress was too formal, too old-fashioned. And that stillness. She turned. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Travis's situation? Comment below. It wasn't Jessica Parker. The face looking back at me was pale as moonlight, beautiful in a way that made my chest tighten and my breath catch. High cheekbones, full lips, eyes like dark pools. But those eyes held something ancient and terrible, and when she smiled, I saw that her teeth were too sharp, too many. The white dress I'd seen from a distance wasn't white at all. It had been white once, maybe decades ago, but now it was stained with something dark that looked like rust, like dried blood. Travis, she said, and her voice was exactly what I'd been hearing. Sweet, concerned, heartbroken. You came back for me. I fumbled for my radio with trembling hands. Dispatch, Unit 7 requesting immediate backup at Widow's Creek. I have contact with... Static. My radio was dead. They can't hear you here, she said, taking a step toward me. Her feet didn't quite touch the ground. No one can hear you here. Just like they couldn't hear Jessica. Where is she? I managed to ask, my hand moving instinctively to the rifle across my back. Where's Jessica Parker? The woman in white tilted her head, like a curious bird. She's with me now. They all are. All the lost girls who wandered too far from the trail who thought they heard someone calling for help. Behind her, the dark water of Widow's Creek began to ripple. Not from wind, the air was perfectly still, but from something rising beneath the surface. Pale shapes like reflected moonlight, but wrong. Too many. Too regular. Faces. Dozens of faces just beneath the water, all looking up at me with empty eye sockets and silent screams. Young faces, old faces, all of them women, all of them wearing expressions of absolute terror. And there, near the center, with dark hair floating like seaweed around her face, was Jessica Parker. My name is Margaret Whitmore, the woman in white continued, gliding closer. I died in these woods in 1847, murdered by a man I trusted, and I've been waiting ever since for someone to join me, someone strong, someone who won't run away. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the rifle sling. The brass buckle felt ice cold against my fingers, and when I looked down I could see my breath fogging in air that had dropped to near freezing. "You're not real?" I whispered. But even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. She was more real than anything I'd ever encountered. More real than my morning coffee. More real than my daughter's laugh. More real than my wife's kiss goodbye. I'm as real as your fear, Travis Hendricks. As real as your guilt. You knew something was wrong 3 weeks ago, didn't you? You felt it in these woods, but you ignored it. You let them call off the search. You let me keep her." The faces in the water were rising now, breaking the surface. I could hear them trying to speak, trying to warn me, but no sound came from their waterlogged throats except a horrible gurgling whisper. "Run, run, run." But I couldn't run. My legs felt rooted to the marshy ground, and something was pulling at my mind, making it hard to think clearly. The woman, Margaret, was speaking again, but her voice seemed to come from inside my head now. "You're tired of fighting, aren't you, Travis? Tired of the responsibility, the pressure, the weight of other people's lives on your shoulders? Wouldn't it be easier to just let go?" Images flashed through my mind. Sarah's face when I missed Emma's school play because of a search. Emma asking why Daddy was always gone. The families of the lost, looking at me with desperate hope I couldn't fulfill. The weight of every person I hadn't found. Every case that went cold. I can make it all stop. The guilt, the fear, the endless searching. You just have to come closer. My feet started moving without my permission, carrying me toward the water's edge. The faces beneath the surface reached up with pale, waterlogged hands, beckoning. Jessica Parker's eyes found mine through the dark water, and I saw her mouth my name, Travis. But then I heard something else. Faint, like an echo from another world. My phone, somehow still getting a signal despite showing no bars. A notification sound I'd heard 1,000 times, a text message. With trembling fingers, I pulled out my phone. The screen was fogged with condensation, but I could make out the words. "Don't forget to pick up Emma at 3 Gao. Soccer practice ends early today. Love you. Sarah." Emma, my daughter, my little girl who painted coffee mugs and waited for bedtime stories and believed her daddy could fix anything. The spell or whatever it was shattered. I jerked backward, nearly falling, and fumbled for my rifle. The woman in white hissed, actually hissed like a snake, and her beautiful face transformed into something twisted and horrible. Her mouth opened wider than any human mouth should, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth, and that sweet voice became a banshee shriek that made my ears bleed. "You cannot leave, you belong to me now." But I was already moving, crashing back through the underbrush toward the main trail. Behind me, I could hear the water exploding as something massive and terrible rose from Widow's Creek. Tree branches whipped my face, tore at my uniform, but I kept running. My GPS was working again, the signal clear and strong. My radio crackled back to life. "Unit 7, please respond. We lost your signal." "Unit 7 to dispatch," I gasped, still running. "Requesting immediate evacuation at Cataract Falls Trailhead. Multiple... Christ, I don't even know how to report this." "Travis, what's your status? You sound distressed." I reached the main trail and allowed myself one look back. The forest behind me was perfectly normal. Green, peaceful, quiet. No sign of the clearing, no sound of water or shrieking spirits. Even the temperature had returned to normal. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew what was still down there in Widow's Creek. "Dispatch, I need you to contact FBI Missing Persons Division. Jessica Parker case needs to be reopened and we need a dive team at Widow's Creek. Also," I paused, knowing how this would sound. "Contact the state archaeologist. I think we might have found a mass grave site." "Copy that, Unit 7. Are you injured?" I thought about that question as I jogged back toward the trailhead, my pack bouncing with each step. Was I injured? My ears were still ringing, my hands still shaking, but physically I was fine. Mentally was another story. Negative on injuries, but I'm going to need some time off after we process this scene. Understood. Backup is en route. I made it back to my truck in 47 minutes, the fastest I'd ever covered that trail. As I waited for the backup units to arrive, I sat in the driver's seat and stared at my phone. Sarah's text was still there, proof that some part of the normal world had reached into that nightmare and pulled me back. I called her. "Travis, you sound strange. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I lied. "Just wanted to hear your voice, and don't worry. I'll definitely be there to pick up Emma at 3. "Of course you will. You never miss her stuff. What's going on?" I looked back at the trailhead, at the innocent-looking path that led to Widow's Creek. Nothing, honey. Just tell Emma I love her, okay? Tell her daddy's coming home. The backup units started arriving 20 minutes later. 4 patrol cars, an ambulance, and Lieutenant Morrison with a look of concern I'd never seen before. I gave them the coordinates for Widow's Creek and told them what they'd find. I didn't mention Margaret Whitmore or the faces in the water. I just said I'd located what appeared to be remains in the creek bed. They found Jessica Parker 3 hours later, along with the bodies of 6 other women, all perfectly preserved in the cold, mineral-rich water. The oldest remains were identified as Margaret Whitmore, missing since 1847. The official report listed it as a serial killer dumping ground. Some sick bastard who'd been using the remote location for over a century and a half. The FBI took over the investigation, and I was commended for my persistence in reopening a cold case. But I know the truth. I know that some things in these mountains are older than human understanding, and hungrier than human evil. I know that Margaret Whitmore is still down there in Widow's Creek, waiting for the next lost soul to hear her crying in the woods. And I know that Jessica Parker and those other women aren't really dead. Not in any way that matters. They're trapped, conscious, aware, serving as bait for the next victim. Forever. I requested a transfer to the visitor center the next week. Desk duty. No more solo patrols. No more search and rescue operations. My superiors think it's PTSD from finding all those bodies, and maybe they're right. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is blowing just right through our bedroom window, I still hear her calling my name. Sweet, concerned, heartbroken. Travis, don't leave me here. And I know that someday when I'm old and weak and my family is gone, I'll go back to those woods one last time, because part of me is still down there in that clearing, will always be down there, caught in Margaret Whitmore's web of loneliness and hunger. The woman in white is patient. She's been waiting since 1847, and she can wait a little longer. But she'll never stop calling my name. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like if you want more terrifying Ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Jessica Parker. I read every single one.